What if one of the most common speech disorders wasn't a physical problem at all? What if it all started with just a single misplaced word from a parent? It's a really powerful and, yeah, deeply controversial idea, and it led to one of the most infamous and frankly disturbing experiments in the history of psychology. Okay, let's get into it. This quote right here is the heart of the whole story. It's from an influential speech pathologist back in the 1930s named Wendell Johnson. And his idea was pretty radical. He believed that stuttering wasn't something you're born with, but something you learn. You see, he thought all kids have little hesitations and repeat words as they learn to talk, but it only becomes a stutter when a parent hears it, labels it as a problem, and makes the child all anxious and self-conscious about it. So, if you have a theory like that, how do you prove it? Well, Johnson and his graduate student, Mary Tudor, came up with a plan. But this wasn't just some abstract study. Oh no, it involved children who had no one to protect them. And the goal was chillingly simple: to see if they could actually induce stuttering in perfectly fluent kids just by telling them they had a problem. So let's set the scene. The year is 1939. The place? An orphanage in Davenport, Iowa. This was the setting for what would eventually be known, and for good reason, as the monster study. And the subjects were chosen very specifically because they were vulnerable. They were orphans, and their guardians weren't likely to question researchers from a big, fancy place like the University of Iowa. 22 kids in total were selected. Some of them already had a bit of a stutter, and some were completely fluent speakers. They were split into different groups, but here's the crucial part. Nobody, not the kids, not the orphanage staff, was told what the research was really about. They were all told it was just routine speech therapy. And this is where the true horror of this experiment really comes into focus. Just look at the difference in the therapies. Half the kids got positive reinforcement. They were told nice, encouraging things like, "You'll outgrow it," or "just pay no attention to it." But the other half, and this included 6 perfectly fluent children, they got what was called negative therapy. They were relentlessly told their speech was broken. Imagine hearing things like, "The staff has come to the conclusion you are a stutterer," and being ordered, "You must stop speaking until you can do it right." It's just awful. The effect on those kids who were told they stuttered was, well, it was immediate and absolutely devastating. These children, who had been speaking just fine, became anxious, quiet, withdrawn. They started refusing to speak, covering their mouths. They began showing the exact behaviors of children with severe stutters. The psychological damage was done, and for some of them, it would follow them for the rest of their lives. So you have to ask yourself, why? Why would anyone do something so ethically bankrupt? Well, it was all to prove this one very specific, very powerful idea. Let's really dig into the theory that drove Wendell Johnson to go to such extreme lengths. He called it the diagnosogenic theory. And the name basically tells you everything you need to know, right? Diagnoso for diagnosis and genic for origin. The origin is the diagnosis. Johnson was arguing that stuttering isn't in our genes or our biology. It's created by a negative social reaction to a kid's perfectly normal speech development. In his world, the cure was to just stop calling it a problem. So the experiment might have given Johnson the results he was looking for, but it came at an unbelievable human cost. Now we need to talk about the ethical fallout and just how badly this study broke pretty much every rule of human research we have today. I mean, from a modern standpoint, this thing is a train wreck. It shatters every core principle of bioethics. Autonomy? Nope. The children and their guardians never gave informed consent. They were lied to. Beneficence? The duty to act in the best interest of your subjects? Ignored. And then there's non-maleficence, the absolute first rule: do no harm. This study was literally designed to cause harm. And finally, justice. There was no justice here. The researchers deliberately targeted and exploited a vulnerable group of orphans who couldn't fight back. Now, it is important to put this into some historical context. As Johnson's colleague pointed out, back then, the strict rules we have for human research just didn't exist yet. Now, this doesn't excuse what happened, not at all, but it does help us understand how it could have happened in the first place. The whole idea of formal research ethics was really just getting started. So Johnson's diagnosogenic theory actually held a lot of sway in the field for decades, partly because of whispers about this dark, unpublished study. But what does modern science tell us about what really causes stuttering? Let's take a look at how far our understanding has come. It really starts with a single, powerful number: 80%. That's the number you get from modern twin studies. Stuttering is estimated to be about 80% inheritable. This is huge. It strongly suggests that genetics, not just the environment, play the leading role here. And that's a direct shot at Johnson's core belief that stuttering was purely a learned behavior. So if it's not just about labeling, then what is it? Well, one modern way to think about it is the demands and capacities model. It's kind of like this bucket. Imagine a child has a certain capacity for fluent speech. That's their motor skills, their language skills, their emotional control. Stuttering happens when the demands placed on them, things like pressure to talk fast or being in a stressful situation, cause that bucket to overflow. And that idea leads us here. Modern science doesn't see stuttering as being caused by one single thing. It's a complex intersection of a whole bunch of factors. You've got physiological stuff like genetics and brain function. You have linguistic factors like how a child's language is developing. There are psychological things like temperament and anxiety. And yes, the environmental factors like how parents and friends react. They do play a role, just not the one all-powerful role that Johnson thought they did. And if we want to get even deeper, we have models like the P&A model. The theory here is that people who stutter have an underlying, probably genetic, issue with how their brain processes the incredibly fast and complex act of speaking. This makes their speech system a little unstable. Then, certain triggers, like a complex sentence or a stressful word, can disrupt that system and cause a moment of stuttering. So the brain processing issue is necessary, but it's not enough to cause it all on its own. So what do we do with a study like this? One that was scientifically revealing in some ways, but morally monstrous in others. As you can imagine, the legacy it left behind is, well, it's really complicated. And here's the really uncomfortable part, the paradox of it all. While the study pretty much proved Johnson's main theory, that stuttering is purely learned, was wrong, it did provide some of the strongest evidence we've ever had that negative labeling can seriously damage a child's speech and their confidence. In a dark, twisted sort of way, it accidentally highlighted just how crucial positive reinforcement is in speech therapy, something that's at the core of how we treat it today. Johnson himself was deeply conflicted by what he'd done. He never formally published the results. The story goes that he was terrified his work would be compared to the horrific medical experiments the Nazis were conducting, which were just coming to light. The secrecy and the sheer horror of the monster study, once the story finally got out, became a poster child for why we desperately need strict, formal ethical oversight in any research involving human beings. And in the end, that's the question the monster study leaves us grappling with. It's this permanent, chilling reminder of what can happen when scientific curiosity gets completely disconnected from basic human empathy. It forces us all to ask, where is that line? And how do we make absolutely sure that it is never, ever crossed again?